Sonic the Hedgehog is my favorite character of all time.
House always wins.
Says the neurotypical people in the audience.
Wins.
Oh hey guys, didn't see you there. That's not true, there's nothing else to look at. You may ask, where are you? Second to, why the hell do you look like that? Well, looks like I'm in endless purgatory for me being a fan of Sonic. That answers both questions, by the way. Now I've been here for about 1 minute and I've already planned my whole life out because there's only one way to get out and that's to play every single Sonic Game Gear game. I'll just stay forever. Remember when we talked about those old classic Sonic games for a good hour or so? Good times, right? Do you want to see me do it again? I have trauma. Time to do it again. To compete with the very successful Nintendo Game Boy, Sega released the Sega Game Gear to, well, I would say to compete, but that would be giving this thing a little bit too much credit. I'm mostly joking. I do quite like the Sega Game Gear for being the Sega Game Gear, but I don't think it holds that much of a nostalgic connection, especially compared to the Sega Genesis, but it's still a fun console. And it was quite powerful for the time, and it even had a screen where you could see it. Seems like a weird thing to credit this handheld for, but remember its main competitor was the Game Boy. And by competitor, can you even call it that? Look at these sales figures. But the reason why the Sega Game Gear was even able to sell those 10 million units was because of their little cash mammal, Sonic the Hedgehog. During the Sega Game Gear's lifespan, they released an astonishing 12 Sonic games. 12. You guys could not get this console to sell for the life of you. While the Sega Genesis had the mainline Sonic games like Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, the Sega Game Gear mostly consisted of weird spin-offs and even demakes of the mainline Sonic games. Sort of. They changed literally everything about the mainline games, like the zone list, level layout, but they do have the same titles, so who the hell knows? But enough kidding around. The only way to escape this endless purgatory is to put myself through an endless purgatory of Sonic. Couldn't I have just repaid for my sins in hell? Sonic the Hedgehog 8-bit is a sort of remake of the original game for the Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog. This game was made to be released on Sega's console before the Sega Genesis, the Sega Master System. To ride the high success of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, they had a demade version of this game be put into development for release around the same time as the original Sonic the Hedgehog. However, when the Sega Game Gear is being released later, Sega said, damn, we need a Sonic game for this thing. And they were looking at it the whole time. Kill me. So the game was shrunk down to fit on a Game Gear screen, making the game much harder to play as you have significantly less screen real estate to look at. But that's what we're doing today. We're talking about the Sonic Game Gear games. I'll suck it up. This game takes many of the concepts from the original Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, obviously, look what the game's called. The game has the overall gameplay of Sonic 1. He runs, spins into a ball, does other stuff. It's classic Sonic, what do you expect? The game just feels much more janky compared to the big grown-up version, which I think is to be expected, but I really feel like some of the physics here could have been tweaked just a little bit before release. For example, I feel like Sonic reaches top speed way too quickly, meaning at some points he'll reach top speed when you don't want him to, which with this game's heavier focus on platforming can be very, very difficult to work with. Also, things like collecting rings work kinda differently, like when you get hit you can never pick them up, making this game way harder than it needs to be. But looking at this game in the inside, and no, not in a gross way, the game starts out just like the base Sonic the Hedgehog. This game's opening zone is Green Hill Zone, just like the original. Again, what have I been saying? Green Hill Zone in the original game is the best part of the game, because after that it gets much, much worse. This game is a decently faithful recreation of Green Hill Zone. It isn't as expansive and it doesn't look as pretty as the other versions, but it's still a pretty good level. Where this game differs from the Genesis game is what happens after Green Hill Zone, because that is a weird way to spell marble. Instead of just recreating the first Sonic game, they instead chose to make it more of their own thing and only have some returning levels, because after Green Hill Zone comes a brand new zone, Bridge Zone. Honestly, it kind of feels like a continuation of Green Hill Zone, just with a lot more bridges, because read the name of the level. This level is actually pretty good, and I would say it's a much better second level than Marble Zone. Not that that's hard to beat, but still, congratulations. And then after Bridge Zone comes Jungle Zone. Jungles are a very cool theme that I don't see enough in games. It may be my Donkey Kong Country bias showing through, but I would say jungles are one of my favorite locations in any game. And this level looks very cool, which is why I find it surprising that they never made another Jungle Zone until Sonic Superstars. Probably because this level kinda sucks. Maybe that's why. I think the platforming is way too tight for Sonic's controls in this game. Like, I never liked the original game's emphasis on platforming because of Sonic's controls, so imagine an even bigger emphasis on platforming with much harder to control controls. I can't control Sonic. Oh yeah, and also the water behind you in Act 2 strains my eyes, and I had to take a break after playing. I just felt like sharing. The next returning zone from the original Sonic is the Labyrinth Zone. Ah! I don't know how many of you guys know this, but I fucking hate Labyrinth Zone from the original Sonic. Like, fucking hate this zone. I think it's slow, does not control well, ugly, not well designed, and other negative things. I'm saying this level fucking sucks, by the way. So imagine this level, but harder to see, Sonic controls even worse somehow, more annoying platforming, and the uncontrollable urge to bash my skull in with a hammer. This level has an even bigger emphasis on underwater platforming, which I already despised from the original game, so look at it now. I want to die, and Sonic controls so awfully underwater in this game, genuinely awful. I know I already said this, but the normal controls are kinda problematic, but fine nonetheless, but being underwater amplifies the problems with them tenfold. Sonic is slow, jumping takes forever, turning takes forever. Now imagine all this, but you stay underwater the entire time and he's moving slower than something slow. I don't know. It sucks! To give this level some credit, it at least takes longer for Sonic to drown, but that's more of a band-aid fix to this level being awful. Oh, the level sucks and all the playtesters quit before they even could finish the first act? Let's make Sonic slower to drown. Cool. Release a game. Is it bad that I think something like that may have actually happened? This game actually does the impossible, and makes a level worse than Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1, by making another Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1. Makes sense. After the shit from God, we get another returning level from the original game, being one of my favorites from the original game, Scrap Brain Zone. And it's terrible. Great. So not only did they need to make the level that already sucks suck even harder, but a level that's fine suck even more? Why? And when I say sucks, I mean sucks. I mean sucks worse than Labyrinth Zone in this game. And wasn't I just bitching about that? Scrap Brain Zone actually tries to be a labyrinth, unlike Labyrinth Zone, but being a puzzle is not fun. The first act is whatever, nothing good, nothing bad, but the second act, however, is a labyrinth type level, which means you have to guess the correct way to go, which sounds horrible, and you would be right, it is. When you get the order of things wrong, you must go all the way to the start, no checkpoints, no hints, just guess until you're done. One of the worst video game levels I've ever subjected myself to play, and I've played the entirety of Sonic Forces and its DLC. The final zone in this game is an original to this game, being the sky-based zone. It's alright, I do like my blue and black mix. I don't have much negative to say about this one, nor positive. I guess it feels a little long. Overall, Sonic 1 8-bit for the Sega Game Gear is not great. I've never really enjoyed the first Sonic game. I think there are good moments, but I feel like it's sandwiched between a bunch of garbage, meaning the game is only worth playing like one time for like 2 levels and then shutting it off and go getting a job or something. In this game, is that, again, there is an argument to be made that this game is better than Sonic 1 for the Genesis, but I don't really agree at all. Maybe if the controls were a little better, but I think the main problem here is that the level design sucks regardless of the controls. I think this game would have been better if the controls were tweaked just a little bit, and Labyrinth and Scrap Brain Zone didn't suck, and maybe if the bosses were a little bit better, but at that point, you are just playing Sonic 1. Speaking of the boss fights in this game, they aren't great. The first boss is one of the easiest things to ever exist, but the rest are actually pretty difficult, and that's because you aren't given any rings in any of the third acts in any zone, meaning you just have to do the entire boss fight without getting hit once. That's not hard, that's just unfair. I think they did this because they realized that with rings, these bosses would have been way too easy, so they just took away rings and said, yeah, this is difficult. You can't get hit at all. I would think this, except, well, no, because you can't even collect your rings after being hit in this game. Yeah. When you get hit in this game, you drop all your rings and you can't pick them up, which is annoying as hell. So yeah, they made these bosses significantly harder than they needed to because they were bored. I honestly really wanted to like this game. I hadn't played this game at all before now, and yeah, it's just not good. I think some of my problems could have been fixed if I just played the original Master System version of this game instead of the Game Gear version, as I would have had much more room to look around, but I don't know, man, this game still is just not fun regardless. I do think there are redeemable parts of this game, but I can't really recommend you play through it because for as much fun as you can have playing this game, you'll have an equal amount, if not more, mental and physical anguish. But maybe this will be like the Genesis. I might not love the first game, but I'll love the ones that come after this. What am I saying? With all that being said, I think it's time to check out Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Game Gear. The 8-bit one. Not the pretty 16-bit one, the 8-bit one. I'm gonna be straight up, starting this game, I did not have the highest hopes. Quite low, in fact. I've played a little bit of this game before, but since I had somewhat high expectations for the first Sonic Game Gear game, and I did not like it, so going into this one, I was not the most excited. I'd heard that Sonic 1 on the Game Gear was actually quite better than Sonic 1 for the Genesis, and when I finally got to playing the whole thing, I hated it. So what should I expect from the sequel? Now, Sonic 2 on the Genesis is one of my favorite games of all time, so I was expecting to not be very impressed by the downgraded version of this game, but I actually kind of liked it. Like, really liked it. Now, of course I didn't enjoy this game as much as the original Sonic 2, it's nowhere close, but compared to Sonic 1 for the Game Gear, this game is so much better. I'm not going to say I'm in love with this game because for one, that's gross, it's a piece of plastic, and for two, not all levels are winners here. Later on in this game, the levels start to get more repetitive and boring, which makes this not really worth playing past the first few actually good levels. This is one of the few Sonic games to not start out with a green grass level, instead starting out with the aptly titled Underground Zone. The plot of this game is that Eggman has kidnapped Tails, so Sonic has to go rescue him. I assume he's kidnapped underground or something. But even outside of the theming, this is a weird introductory level for a Sonic game. For one, especially with the screen crunch brought from the Sega Game Gear, this is a pretty difficult level, as well as the level introducing gimmicks like minecarts in the second act, so this just feels very odd for being the first level. But as the game continues, it goes for more traditional Sonic levels, and like I said before, it actually has some pretty good levels with interesting themes. I think the game definitely dips around the last two, but compared to 8-bit Sonic 1, I might as well be sucking this game's cock. Like, I think the idea of Gimmick Mountain Zone is really funny, and we even get a pretty good rendition of Green Hill Zone midway throughout the game. I think the levels Scrambled Egg Zone and Crystal Egg Zone are kind of too similar to Labyrinth Zone, which makes these levels immediately suck in my eyes, and I did get stuck in Crystal Egg Zone, which is pretty lame. But I think by complaining about some of the bullshit in this game would be kind of redundant, because the problems that this game does have is pretty much just the same as Sonic 1 8-bit. So yes, this game does have its flaws, and many of them are shared with the one that came before, and many of those flaws really do bring the game down by a lot, but it doesn't make me dislike this game as much as I did with the first one, because in fact, I did quite like this game. I enjoyed my time. So with that, on to the next Game Gear Sonic game, Sonic Chaos. I'm going insane, we're only on game 3. Okay, so I'm gonna be honest here, the second I started this game, I was immediately put off by how this game feels. Compared to the demakes of the first two Sonic games, this game has its movements much more in line with the Sonic games on the Genesis, which seems like a good thing, but I think that those games take a slightly different approach with this physics for the best. Considering that while for the time the Game Gear was a powerful console, it's still nowhere close to the power of the Genesis, so things like Sonic Speed had to be controlled in a more formal sense. But now they found some weird middle ground where they're able to keep the limitations of the 8-bit hardware in mind, which makes the movement just feel a little clunky. Everything just has a weird delay to it, and it doesn't really feel like you're controlling Sonic, more like you're loosely guiding him and you can't properly react to certain hazards. This game also adds the spin dash from the Genesis games, which again, sounds great, but with the limited power of the brick, the spin dash just feels kinda janky and weightless. I think the main issue here is that I'm grasping a lack of, I'm gonna say it, momentum. And I know that word is overused when it comes to Sonic, but hear me out. I know the word momentum when talking about Sonic makes you revolt back into your seat of choice, but I'm not being annoying here and complaining about the 3D games right now. I'm talking about embryos. But the reason why I and so many others find the Genesis games so good is because of their realistic physics and momentum, which controls like a insert funny joke here as you play. So when you have levels designed in a similar way with a lack of fun momentum that feel more like a fat pig trying to run, I guess it's easy to see why I don't love how this game feels. What I do like about this game is that it's not limited to having to be similar to a Genesis counterpart, since unlike Sonic 1 and 2 for the Game Gear, Sonic Chaos does not have a Genesis version, meaning it can do more of its own thing, which I really like. When you first start this game, you have the choice to play as either Sonic or Tails, which I was originally really excited about because I thought that this would introduce new gameplay options, but from what I know, besides the visual difference that you can either play as a Sonic sprite or a Tails sprite, there are no actual gameplay changes. In this game, you start out in Turquoise Hill Zone, which I have nothing to really say about. It's a pretty basic first stage grass level, but I think the name is really silly, and that's about it. The level design here definitely takes a step up from the previous two games I've looked at, which is really nice, although I don't think the physics really work the best with this more in-depth level design, but I've already complained about that. I guess I just don't really know what to say about this game. There's no real interesting tidbits like it being a demake, because it's not. This is just its own thing, and it's pretty boring. It just feels like a basic, not bad, not great, nothing special, just boring Sonic game, and I think that makes this game so much worse than the previous two games, even if this game is objectively the better game. To put it in perspective, I like when a game is distinct and feels different from any other game, so when you can just blend this game into a million other games, I see no reason to keep playing even if it's a fine game. Like, I'd rather have a game that may not be super polished but has some creative ideas than a game that is super polished and doesn't have many creative ideas. Do you catch my drift here? Wait. Holy shit, I'm so happy to not be playing a platformer. Sonic Drift is a racing game starring Sonic and friends, you know, something that every game franchise tries like once and never does again. Looking at you, Atari Carts, what the hell are you? Although, to be fair, Sonic does have a pretty rich history with racing games, with the Sonic and Sega All-Stars racing games and Team Sonic Racing, and how could I forget Sonic R? How could I forget? But it all started with a little game called Sonic Drift, and this is an okay racing game for the time. I'm not going to pretend like this game has the most in-depth gameplay, because it most definitely does not, but it actually is quite fun and has a style which I appreciate. You can pick between Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Eggman, who each have different stats to change up the gameplay, and you can race on tracks based around the Sonic series from up to that point. Really, what more could you ask out of a Sonic racing game on a console that looks like this? The gameplay mostly just consists of you turning at the right time and dodging certain objects on the track, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's more in depth than you think. And I have a big appreciation for how the tracks look. They're all visually distinct, and while none of them really feel different, I just like looking at colors. It's not hard to appease me. But what I appreciate most about this game is that it doesn't personally gouge my eyes out. I've said this 100 million times in the past already, but sprite games that try and do a 3D style map have always made me sick looking at them. I'm not exactly sure the science behind it or anything, but I think it's the grain from the screen. It just messes with my eyes and I can't play much longer than 20 minutes. But this game doesn't go all out and make it a walking seizure warning, which I must say, I very much appreciate. Does that mean I'm ever going to play this game again? No. This game also does have 2-player for someone who somehow met another living human with a Game Gear and a will to live. I wanted to try the 2-player, so I put up a sign at school to see if anyone would play with me. Never mind. Although this game is kind of janky, like the turning requires godly reaction time and things like the drift don't really work as intended. I still do appreciate this game in many ways, so yeah, I'm never playing Mario Kart 8 Deluxe again. I have Sonic Drift. If there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I love pinball games, specifically Sonic Spinball. Sonic Spinball is a 1993 pinball video game developed by Sega Technical Institute and published by Sega. It is a spin-off of the Sonic the Hedgehog series. Players control Sonic the Hedgehog, who must stop Dr. Robotnik from enslaving the population in a giant pinball-like mechanism. This game is set in the series' pinball machine-like environment, with Sonic acting as a pinball. I have never played Sonic Spinball for longer than 3 minutes. Sonic Spinball on the Sega Game Gear is an 8-bit remake of Sonic Spinball for the Genesis, which is a simple little pinball game with god-awful physics. So to prepare myself for the adventure of playing Sonic Spinball for the Game Gear, I'm going to play a little bit of Sonic Spinball for the Genesis. I don't like this game. Let's play a worse version of it. Alright, first things first, I could not play this game. The game just feels so slow, clunky, boring, automated, it's unfair, I just don't want to play this game. I guess the game looks nice, but like, I don't care. I'm tired of this. And this game is really hard. Like, I couldn't even get past the first damn level. That's kind of crazy. Yeah, this game sucks. Don't play it unless you want to find a new source of self-torture like me. Yet another little platformer to talk about. God, I'm so tired of this shit. Sonic Triple Trouble is made to be the Sega Game Gear's version of Sonic 3, following loosely the same story and having some similar gameplay ideas. The plot is pretty much the same as Sonic 3, you gotta get the Chaos Emeralds to stop Robotnik and Knuckles, Robotnik eventually turns on Knuckles, etc, etc. But, this game introduces a brand new character to the Sonic series being Fang the Sniper. You know, this dude. I f***ing love Fang, man. For so many years he was such a grossly underused character, only really being used in this game, Sonic the Fighters, and making small little cameos in Sonic Generations and Mania. He ended up getting used again in Sonic Superstars with a starring role, which is very cool, so I hope to see more of Fang the Sniper in the future. I love Jeroboas. Back to Sonic Triple Trouble though, out of all the Sonic platformers on the Sega Game Gear, this one is probably my favorite. It has the most identity out of any of these games, has the most fun gameplay and general level design, and it also looks the nicest. Cause yeah, this game actually has some pretty enjoyable levels, surprisingly. I was actually able to enjoy myself while playing them. Maybe I was just in a good mood or something while playing, but I had a lot of fun, except the last level, all those dead ends were pretty stupid. I didn't like that. This game actually got a great fan-made remake, which I played, and it really shows how good the game's fundamental level design is. I don't want to act like these are exactly the same game, because the remake does take liberties to get rid of many of the game's flaws, like its janky physics and sometimes questionable level choices, but it does prove that at its core, this is a good game. But this game does have some great set pieces, like this cool train scene, and all the fights with Fang the Sniper are really cool, so I really like the scope this game achieves, even if it does have some trouble considering that you're playing it on this. Okay, so I actually have a story with this game, with the fan-made remake, that I've wanted to tell for a very long time, but I've never really found the right time, but I think there's no better time than this. Okay, so I had this game on my radar since it fully released, and it had been around a year and I hadn't really gotten to it yet. Well, anyway, it was Homecoming of 2023, and I asked someone out and promptly got rejected because that's the Coil way. So I was kind of bummed out when I went to Homecoming because I was like, god damn, this kind of sucks. So I just kind of hung around the whole time and ate some food, but when I eventually got home, I played the entire remake in one sitting while, I was crying. I'm not afraid to admit it. But yeah, that's how I ended up playing this game. This is truly cementing my spot in the loser virgin community. But anyway, Sonic Triple Trouble is a surprisingly fun game, and even though I wouldn't say I'd go out of my way to play this game again, if I were stuck in another dimension forced to play every single Game Gear Sonic game, I wouldn't be too upset.
Right.
Okay, so remember when I talked about Sonic Drift and said that it was a fine racing game for a handheld? Imagine that with some more characters and some slightly different stages. I guess Sonic Drift 2 maybe feels slightly better, but it also could just be the placebo effect. Maybe I should start taking my meds again. The playable characters here are Sonic, Tails, Amy, Knuckles, Eggman, Fang, and Metal Sonic. Very cool. Some more fun-looking stages. I don't know what else to say about this game, but just like the first Sonic Drift game, I tried to make an open offer for fellow people to play the 2-player with me. You know how this ends. I just can't imagine myself actually playing this game for longer than 3 seconds like the first one, but I guess if there were anything I had to say about this game is that it has some fun characters and environments. I still can't drive. Tails is one of my favorite Sonic characters and just characters in general. He's truly a hoodlum like me, smoking a fat joint and... where am I going here?
Smoking is cool.
The Sonic series has always had a weird relationship with spin-offs. Where the Mario series in itself is technically a spin-off of the Donkey Kong series, the spin-offs end up turning into their own sub-series of their own multiple games disconnected from the larger Mario series. Like say Luigi's Mansion, Donkey Kong kinda, and the Yoshi series and more, but Sonic has never really been like this. I would even argue that the side characters in Sonic are significantly more important than in Mario, like compared to Tails, what the hell does Luigi have? But the Sonic series has never really had as many spin-offs and definitely not to the degree of the Mario series. That's not to say that the Sonic series has never had any spin-offs, because it definitely has some. Say Shadow the Hedgehog from 2005.
Don't let the black creature. Damn, they got away.
Shadow Generations, the Knuckles series, I guess. Yeah, Sonic doesn't have very many spin-offs. But a Sonic spin-off I and many others tend to forget about are the Tails spin-offs, and the first one being Tails Sky Patrol for the Sega Game Gear. Do we need to euthanize the fox? Compared to the previous 2D platformers we've looked at for this console, this game takes a very different approach to its platforming, if you can even call it a platformer. This game is more of an auto-scrolling shooter where Tails has this little ring thing dangling out of his butt which he can throw at enemies. Your main goal in this game is to not touch anything, because if you do, you immediately fall to the ground, killing you immediately. I think the gameplay loop here is decently fun, but it definitely does get very repetitive because there's not really much you can do with this without making weird stage gimmicks, and I don't really care about all that. But what really brings this game down for me is a screen crunch from the Game Gear. In a game like this, the main thing you need to worry about is your reaction time, because you need to dodge pretty much everything on the screen, and the screen is the size of my fingernail. There are some really annoying parts in this game brought up by the huge screen crunch simply because you don't have enough reaction time to properly dodge it. This is probably the best looking game we've talked about here. I actually believe that this game uses slightly altered Sonic 2 sprites for Tails, which is very impressive. And even the backgrounds look like they're grabbed straight from Sonic 2, which is great, but honestly, I kinda would've preferred if they took a step back from making it look nice and made it play nice. Cause it doesn't. But this isn't Tails' only game, because somehow this game got a sort of sequel. I'm saying we got another Tails game. What would we do without it? Alright, you guys know Sonic Adventure? The first true 3D Sonic game with 6 interconnecting stories, genius level design, beautiful environments. Yeah, well this game sucks. All my homies play Tails Adventure. Yeah. This game stars Tails, again, and instead of being a shooter-type game, this game, Tails Adventure, takes more of a platforming approach but differentiates itself from the normal non-stop Sonic platforming by having Tails go at a much slower pace. Instead of running, Tails has a much slower walk and is able to climb up platforms and stuff. And when you press B, Tails pulls a bomb out of his butt and throws it in the direction you're facing. The platforming in this game, rather than taking a speed approach, takes more of a puzzle-oriented approach to its gameplay. It's never anything too crazy, it mostly just has you push around a spring or something to progress, but it is a nice change from the speedy focused gameplay of most other Sonic platformers. I actually quite like this form of platforming, even though it can be kind of slow and even boring at times. I do like that it's different. Tails can also fly in this game because that's his thing, you know, with the two tails. This allows him to access certain areas he can't access with his normal jump, and even though I don't think that this game does much besides, you know, getting access to slightly higher platforms, there is a lot of potential that could be used here. Like, you know how everyone's so big on having multiple paths in Sonic levels because it's a very cool way to entice a player to replay the game and think differently? Well, imagine if they went all in with Tails was flying this game and they're able to have you replay this game in so many different creative ways, making you view this game through like 8 different lenses. The main issue here is that Tails' energy for flying runs out very quickly and comes back very slowly, which gets really annoying. It would be a lot cooler if this game took the approach that most other Sonic games have with Tails, where he loses energy as he continues to fly, but almost immediately as he hits the ground he regains his energy. That's a lot nicer. Another thing this game does differently is redesigning how the ring system works. In most Sonic games, you collect rings throughout the level, and then if you get hit, they go flying around and you have to go pick them up. But if you don't have any rings, then you lose a life. But Tails' Adventure takes a much different approach to the iconic ring system in Sonic. I don't like saying that. In this game, instead of losing all your rings when you get hit and you must collect them all, you have a certain amount of rings, and whenever you get hit, you lose one and you can't pick it back up. But also, most enemies have rings, so if you hurt one, then you can collect a ring, giving you an extra hit point that you can take. This is a lot of fun. I actually really like this. This game kind of feels like a literal adventure for Tails, and I actually believe that this game is supposed to work as some sort of origin story for Tails, where he gains confidence and becomes a hero, I think. And this game does change its gameplay every so often. For example, in the level Lake Rocky, Tails is in some sort of submarine thing. I don't know, it takes you places underwater, but I have no idea what I'm supposed to call this thing. An issue I do have with this game is that I feel like the environments are a little boring here. As most of the game takes place inside of a big cave, there isn't much you can do with that art style. But the sprite work here really is great. Like, yeah, this looks almost as good as a Sega Genesis game. It's really cool to see how much they're pushing the Game Gear's hardware as the generation progresses. So with that, on to the next game. I'm about to pass the f*** out. If there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I love a good old playthrough of Labyrinth Zone, says Evil Coil. Only Evil Coil would say that. I f***ing hate this level. So you should have seen the delight on my face when I found a little game called Sonic Labyrinth. You see, the joke here is that there was no delight. I was in fact not quite happy. The plot of Sonic Labyrinth is that in the middle of the night, Robotnik sneaks into Sonic's house and replaces his shoes with slowdown boots, which, as the name says, makes Sonic not be able to go fast. I assume the shoes are really heavy or have glue on the bottom, but it's just kind of funny, I think. Anyway, now that Sonic can't run, he's trapped in this labyrinth place and must collect the Chaos Emeralds to fight Robotnik and get back his speed. So now Sonic must go through these seizure-inducing isometric stages with 3 keys hidden inside the level, and once collected, he can escape. The main gameplay loop of this game is very similar to Sonic 3D Blast, where you must collect all the collectibles around the levels to progress, but this game is a lot worse. So obviously Sonic can't run, because that's the point of the game, which makes this game feel like such a slog to play. He can still perform a spin dash to go fast, but you can't control Sonic as he's rolling in the spin dash, and a lot of times since the screen is so small, you'll end up just hitting some spikes or some other hazard and die. So basically you have a choice to either go at a snail's pace and rot in your chair out of boredom, or roll around in a spin dash you can't properly control, so it's pretty much a gamble, although I do like to gamble. Again, who's writing this? Will you be taking the blue pill or the red pill? Guess what, the outcome of both still leads to you being depressed. I'll take the antidepressants. But even if you're a masochist and choose to go slow, you're still forced to do a spin dash because Sonic's so slow he can't go up any surface that's more than 2 degrees. So you gotta use a spin dash and then you get hit and your keys go flying everywhere and you gotta collect them, and oh my god, I need my Adderall. I won't lie though, I did have some fun with this game. I think that the general gameplay loop of this game is okay, and the keys you need to collect are never hidden in any crazy places. The levels are relatively easy to get through, but it can feel really sluggish. But yeah, this game is pretty much a Sonic 3D Blast with looser and slower controls with less collectibles to grab throughout the levels. And as many of you know, I don't hate Sonic 3D Blast. I kind of like it even with its flaws, so I can't really hate this game either. I'm able to kind of tolerate it. Alright, so you know that moment where you've been sitting down in a chair for too long, you get up too quickly and your vision gets all blurry and your legs can't hold you? Yeah, that's Sonic Blast. I may also have low blood pressure, I should probably do something about that. Sonic Blast is yet another goddamn platformer to add to the lineage of not great Sonic platformers on the Sega Game Gear, but this one is special. Look at it. This game uses the technology that games like Sonic 3D Blast and Donkey Kong Country use, where they have 2D sprites traced from 3D models. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I don't really have the time nor mental capacity to explain it today, because I've been non-stop playing Sonic Game Gear games. I probably have some sort of semi-permanent brain damage. Now, this game does look pretty unbelievable for a game released in 1996 for the Game Gear. I mean, look at this game compared to a game released in 1996 for the Game Boy. This was nuts. But advanced doesn't mean appealing, because while this game is technically very advanced for the Game Gear of all things, it also looks like the visual embodiment of an aneurysm. There are just too many pixels on screen, and it makes it beyond difficult to separate the sprites from the foreground and the background, making the whole game annoying to play. From the start, you have the choice to pick between either Sonic or Knuckles as a playable character, which, unlike other games on the Sega Game Gear that allow you to switch characters, there is an actual gameplay difference between the two. Sonic has a spin dash and a newly added double jump, which is always fun, and Knuckles has a spin dash as well as his glide, which is always one of my favorite things to mess around with in a Sonic game. Too bad his glide would make the Game Gear explode, so they had to drastically slow it down as well as tame the reach you're able to get with it. So instead of a glide where if used correctly you can skip huge chunks of the level, now you can, I don't know, dick around with it. But it's not just Knuckles' glide that's slowed down, it's almost everything since this game is such a powerhouse. During many parts of the game, it'll slow you down because the Game Gear simply cannot handle what's going on. Spin dash, slow down. Go at full speed, slow down. Go around a loop, slow down. This makes the game such a damn drag to play because you don't get the dopamine rush of at least hitting some speed like the other games. Because the slowdown issue is still an issue with the other games, but isn't as terrible. Here, Jesus Christ. And the levels here aren't even interesting at all. I assume for some issue of them blowing their load out too early with the fancy vomit-inducing graphics, they couldn't have interesting level design that goes much further than a straight shot with a couple loops around it. With the other Sonic games in the Game Gear, I could usually find at least a few things that I enjoyed about the game. Say some fun levels, maybe the graphics looked pretty, but I genuinely cannot find anything appealing about this game. To me, this game just feels like a basic, slow, boring mess of pixels, and I frankly want nothing to do with it. Which is why I played the whole thing and am dedicating a segment for this game here. I only threw up 2.5 times while playing. Here we go. At last, we are at the final Sonic Game Gear game on the list. Thank fucking God. This game is a remake of the Sega Genesis classic, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. What a classic. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine was originally a puzzle game called Puyo Puyo in Japan and in other markets, but when localizing the game for fat, sweaty Americans, they realized that Americans really love fat, sweaty dudes, so they rebranded the game as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for money reasons. I'm actually quite the Puyo Puyo aficionado, so I can't wait to play a downgraded version of the game on my Sega Game Gear. Oh boy. Some people, I guess, really like the Game Gear version more than the Sega Genesis version of this game because it has less motion, making it easier to play or something, but I really like the bouncing in the original, and this one is just boring. Playing through every single Sonic Game Gear game has really put me through some real emotions. Because just like having a family member pass on or having your leg blown off in combat, I experienced a little thing I like to call distress. I've experienced my ups and mostly downs here, but I think in some way, I'm proud of myself that I've finally gone through and gave all these Sonic Game Gear games a shot. Like before I could say that I thought Sonic Blast was shit, but now I can say that I know Sonic Blast is shit. It's a wild reality. This means I'm finished. I can go home now. Why am I not home? Alright. F these games.
Wait. Am I home? I think I'm home. Wait, let me check. Yep! Now that I'm back home, I can finally indulge myself in my copies of Donkey Kong Country Returns, Sonic X for the Leapfrog, and Sonic Forces. Can I go back?